So, Gunbuster. It's that classic 6-episode OVA series made by Studio Gainax in the late 80s. It's got cute girls piloting giant robots, it's got an incredible soundtrack, it's got a message about the ravages brought on by the unceasing march of time. More on that later. So why do I love it so much? Well, it's for all of the reasons listed above, but it's also because Gunbuster made it possible for Neon Genesis Evangelion and Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann to exist. I've talked at length about Evangelion before and have done commentary on it, and I've also mentioned Gurren Lagann quite a few times, so it's well documented that I think highly of those two series. But one thing I never really got around to mentioning is that they both owe quite a lot to Gunbuster. In a way, Gunbuster is a proto-Evangelion and a proto-Gurren Lagann, and subsequently Noriko is like a proto-Shinji and a proto-Simon. There are quite a few themes and scenarios that Gunbuster explores first before the later two Gainax productions. The first thing, and I'll give you a little warning right now that I'll be spoiling key aspects of all three series. Seriously, if you don't want to be spoiled, close the video right now. The first thing is the death of friends, family, and lovers. In Gunbuster, the character I'm referring to is Smith Torin. Smith was a pilot, just like Noriko. The pair of them had gotten in trouble, thus earning themselves the punishment of cleaning the artillery lenses on the outside of the ship, allowing for them to have some alone time together for a rather extended period of time. The two of them naturally began to grow close, and Smith offered to be Noriko's partner at a time when Noriko's relationship with Kazumi was sort of suffering, and there were all kinds of hints about the potential for something more than friendship to exist between Noriko and Smith. And then he died. Naturally, as Noriko had sort of started to rely on him emotionally, she was devastated. And it was only the prospect of the imminent death of everyone that caused Noriko to sort of snap out of her torpor, take matters into her own hands, and effectively go on a suicide mission with the Gunbuster. There are two obvious parallels in my mind. In Evangelion, Shinji had to bear witness to Unit 03 become possessed by an angel, for want of a better term, and upon learning that the pilot was trapped, he refused to do anything. He decided it would be better to just lie down and die rather than to kill someone. So the powers that be decided that was unacceptable, and by means of the dummy plug, they essentially forced Shinji to slaughter Unit 3 rather brutally, and he was sort of forced to witness and feel Unit 1 just sort of like rip out and crush the entry plug of Unit 3. Now that's all well and horrible, but the cherry on top of all of this is that the pilot turned out to be Shinji's friend Toji, who was irreparably maimed by this encounter. Perhaps understandably, Shinji takes all of this rather poorly, but for a longer period of time than Noriko took. Some of this can be explained by episode count. Gunbuster being a 6-episode OVA had less overall runtime to work with, so they kinda had to pick up the pace on some things. Whereas Shinji, being a 26-episode broadcast anime, had a bit more leeway to mope and sulk. The other parallel here is the death of Kamina. When Simon was letting his mind wander during an operation to capture an enemy mobile fortress, Kamina took the time to get him back on track, but was fatally impaled for his trouble. Needless to say, Simon felt rather responsible for that. And I don't think anyone truly blamed him, but at the same time, Simon became the de facto leader after Kamina, and he was in no position to live up to everyone's expectations. So it's really only natural that this combination of factors caused him to sort of retreat inwards and sulk and not really be an effective leader or effective at really anything. But it's this character arc of everyone losing someone and eventually sort of snapping out of it. In Noriko's case, it was death being imminent, and, essentially she didn't want to die. understandably so. With Shinji, he sort of had to be talked into getting back in the robot. You know, it took a bit of a pep talk and basically everyone else incapacitated. For Simon, you know, he just sort of had to eventually realize that Kamina was right. You know, he is dead, but he was right about Simon being capable, and, you know, it now fell to him to actually be capable and do what everyone kind of sort of knew he could do. So, the second theme I've noticed is that when excrement starts rocketing towards the fan, people are forced to make very difficult decisions, and they choose the difficult choice. So in Gunbuster, there are plenty of examples. Noriko piloting Gunbuster for the first time springs to mind. You know, I had already mentioned it before, imminent death and all that. But the ship was about 30 seconds away from being destroyed. The idea being that suicide to try and take the aliens with them was better than letting them tear them apart or trying to escape and leading them back to Earth. You know, not a great situation to begin with, but the idea was that was preferable. Noriko took a third option. So rather than just sit there and allow everyone to die, she sortied so that she would die fighting rather than cowering. And she went into the fight fully expecting to die. Now, the better example, I think, one that I haven't touched on before, happens in the very last episode. So at this point, the human fleet has brought essentially a massive black hole bomb into the heart of enemy territory, with designs on wiping out the aliens in one fell swoop, but it's become too damaged in transit to operate properly. Noriko posits that the power source that powers Gunbuster could be used to jumpstart the black hole bomb, but they would in all likelihood get caught up in the resulting black hole. And, you know, that's not a particularly good way to die either, but at this point it was do or die. So, nonetheless, Noriko and Kazumi do this willingly, detonating the bomb and being basically right on ground zero of the whole thing. So the bomb detonated, the black hole was formed, and it wiped out the aliens in their totality, and the remnants of Gunbuster got caught up in the gravitational well. Eventually, it did manage to drift back to Earth with Noriko and Kazumi, but they were horrified to discover via, like, the little clock in the cockpit of Gunbuster saying, like, here's how much time is shifting, that around about 12,000 years have passed. So this is a great and terrible thing, as not only would everyone Noriko had ever known died millennia ago, but the entire Earth as a whole would have changed beyond anyone's recognition. The only thing that makes this outcome marginally bearable is that the residents of Earth 12,000 years in the future sort of collectively broadcast a message welcoming home the heroes that saved them. You know, even after 12 millennia, they are remembered and cherished for their sacrifice. As with Gunbuster, I think Evangelion provides two decent examples as well. The first is when Zeruel, the 14th Angel, is making its assault on the Geofront. Shinji is unwilling to fight after the incident with Unit 3, and is even willing to go so far as to just quit, turn his back on everyone. As he's doing so, Zeruel appears, kicks a big hole in the Geofront's front door, and incapacitates both Rei and Asuka with not much effort at all. And it's only when Shinji's really presented with the possibility of the end of the world as he knows it that he finally relents, gets in the robot, and, you know, starts taking the Angel to task. The other, and I think better example, has to do more with the film End of Evangelion, which, you know, without going down that rabbit hole, sort of like an alternate episode 25 and 26, but not really. It's weird. Evangelion's kind of a mess sometimes. But the upshot is, the world actually was ending. Every human being had been broken down mentally and physically and was starting to reform into a gestalt entity. And because the powers that be behind this apocalypse have seen fit to defer to Shinji, he now has a very weighty choice to make. Remain in instrumentality, and in doing so forsake individuality, but also the pain and suffering that accompanies individuality. Or you can return to reality as it was, accepting that pain and suffering will happen, but that you will be an individual. And the whole show up until this point is basically Shinji struggling to cope with reality and individuality. So when he ultimately decides to reject instrumentality and return to being an individual, that shows that he has the willingness to make the tough choice and do the hard work to be an individual and improve himself. I mean, it's a fair bit more esoteric than the whole I might get blown up by this bomb that I'm detonating, but Shinji's choice is really no less pivotal for humanity as a whole, considering that instrumentality, at least on paper, solves all the problems he has had, and that he would choose to reject it shows that, maybe he has learned something. Lastly, just to round everything out, we have to add an example from Gurren Lagann. Now, to give context up front, Simon and company have discovered the true nature of the threat that besets them, and they have managed to emerge victorious, albeit not without loss. At this point, Simon is in all likelihood the most powerful being in existence, what with all the spiral power he can generate, having created a giant robot whose size can be measured in astronomical units. So despite all that, his now wife, Nia, is fading from existence, as is the fate of all anti-spiral constructs. She had managed up until this point to hold on and secure her existence for a little while, but it was really only delaying the inevitable. Now Simon, with his near infinite power, could absolutely just preserve her himself. And it's not just our inference. People explicitly say to Simon, you don't have to let her die. You can preserve her, well beyond her natural lifespan, whatever that would be. And he tells them, no, I can't do that. And basically, that was the central conflict. The anti-spiral had talked about how spiral power used recklessly will ultimately destroy everything. And Simon has come to the conclusion that, as a human being, he is mortal, Nia is mortal, all human beings will eventually die a natural death, and that using spiral power to subvert nature, that would be the first step down a dark path that they sort of tacitly agreed not to go down. But at the same time, it's really difficult. He could bend the rules to preserve the love of his life, and when you get down to it, a lot of their victory would not have been possible without her. Or he could simply let nature take its course and allow her to die. The problem with that being is, though it does abide by the laws of the universe, he's in the fairly unique position that he can change them. But ultimately, Simon had the ability to cheat death, but chose not to do so. Realistically, if he had resurrected Nia, that would have been a drop in the bucket in terms of causing the spiral nemesis that would destroy everything. His actions wouldn't have caused the end of the universe, but Simon understood that he is not above the rules, and that if even he abides by the rules, no one has any plausible excuse to break them. It's a hard and almost heartless thing to do, at least until one considers that this is what Nia would have wanted, but it's ultimately the right choice to not abuse power when presented with the chance. So, between Gunbuster, Evangelion, and Gurren Lagann, there is one final key similarity. They are all worth your time.